Every wide-scale organizational effort requires helping people to own and contribute to the vision at multiple levels and in various ways. Delegation is involved when many contributors make independent decisions affecting the overall effort. As organizations grow and internal communication and cooperation needs multiply, no one person can carry broad decision-making authority at every level of the operation. But beyond the efficiency gain of functional delegation, an organization that delegates well is more ethical and more humane, as we shall see. It is a better place to work. Furthermore, delegation has long been seen as more than just a concession to necessity or even to our humanity. Delegation produces better results than one person overseeing all operations. Even for a perceptive leader, better at making decisions than anyone else in the organization. The organizations in the two biblical case studies have recently grown quite large, and their efforts are floundering because of a lack of effective delegation. But as this problem is solved, they are able to develop and thrive, as we shall see. I'm reading from Exodus 18, verses 13 through 26. The next day Moses sat as a judge for the people, while the people stood around him from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone, while all the people stand around you from morning until evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known to them the statutes and instructions of God." Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and the people with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You should represent the people before God, and you should bring their cases before God. Teach them the statutes and instructions, and make known to them the way they are to go and the things they are to do. You should also look for able men among the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy, and hate dishonest gain. Set such men over them as officers, over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them sit as judges for the people at all times. Let them bring every important case to you, decide every minor case amongst themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all the people will go to their home in peace. So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men from all Israel and appointed them as heads over the people, as officers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And they judged the people at all times. Hard cases they brought to Moses, but the minor cases they decided themselves. Next, I'll be reading from Acts 6, verses 1 through 7. Now, during those days, when the disciples were increasing in number, the Hellenists complained against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. And the 12 called together the whole community of the disciples and said, "It is not right that we should neglect the word of God in order to wait at tables. Therefore, friends, select from among yourselves 7 men of good standing, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may appoint to this task, while we, for our part, will devote ourselves to prayer and to serving the word." What they said pleased the whole community. And they chose Stephen, a man full of faith in the Holy Spirit, together with Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicolaus, a proselyte of Antioch. They had these men stand before the apostles, who prayed and laid their hands on them. The word of God continued to spread. The number of disciples increased greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests became obedient to the faith. When Jethro approached Moses with his observations about how Moses spent his day, he began gently asking, "Why do people stand around you all day long?" Moses starts to explain what he's doing, like a father might try to explain his job to his children. "Well, it is like this." But soon Jethro made it very clear. He wasn't lacking in understanding of what Moses was doing. He was rather questioning it because he had an all too well familiarity with the issue. "What you are doing is not good." Likewise, when the Greek-speaking Jews recognized that their widows weren't being taken care of in the same way the native Judean widows were, they came with a similar complaint. "This is not working." It isn't easy in those circumstances for any leaders to respond non-defensively. Moses could have said, "Hey, I'm too busy to delegate. Where would I find the time to identify all those leaders?" Peter could have said, "Hey, remember Jesus gave me the keys to the kingdom. What I say goes. Sit down and quit complaining." But of course they didn't do that and likely wouldn't have. But perhaps those thoughts ran through their minds. They were only human after all. Moses and the apostles did what wise leaders today do. They take critiques and complaints of loyal team members seriously. Jethro was Moses' father-in-law, and before giving Moses any feedback, he likely spent a whole day watching Moses decide cases while people stood around. He had compassion for Moses. He would soon be worn out. But he also had sympathy for the people who stood around him all day. Moses was wearing them out too. The ethnic tension between the Greek speakers and local Jews is undoubtedly something we can imagine ripping apart a young church. In this case, those bringing the complaint seemed only eager to help. While Moses' situation and that of the early church were each unique, they seem very common in ministry organizations and churches. The organization has grown faster than the structures to support it, and people begin to notice and complain. So, what should leaders do when this happens? Principle 0. This is not about delegation, but about listening to critique. Listen to and evaluate fairly. Wise and loyal criticism. When people bring criticism but want you to succeed, don't respond defensively, but listen to them. It may be God's voice you are hearing. Principle 1. Identify or develop trustworthy people who can take on the new responsibility. You see in Exodus 18, Jethro said to identify able men among all the people, men who fear God, are trustworthy, and hate dishonest gain. And in Acts 6, the apostles said, select from amongst yourselves 7 men of good standing, full of the Spirit and of wisdom. And today, one way to work this out is to identify or develop and support trustworthy people. Some may not be quite ready, but eager to grow. Secondly, delegate new responsibility with authority. You see in the Exodus passage, Moses set up the structure to allow for solutions to be found in a ground-up way. And in Acts 6, the Greek-speaking Jews who identify the problem are set apart and authorized to solve it. And for today, once authority has been delegated, submit to the newly empowered leaders. Principle 3, delegate the vision and not just the task. Moses' job was to teach God's laws and let trustworthy people at multiple levels begin to work out implications for themselves. And in Acts 6, Peter and the apostles could have given step 1, step 2, step 3, a little kind of guide for how to solve this problem. They didn't do that. The people they chose carried the vision within them. The apostles stayed focused on their vision to teach the word and to pray. And the way we see this today is empowerment requires authority and vision, or else the delegation is just getting someone else to do what you don't have time to do. So don't become a micromanager. I want to talk a bit about ethnic tension and delegation. The Jerusalem church at this time was still entirely Jewish Christians. It didn't really break out of the Jewish world into which it was born until Acts 10, and significantly later with the ministry of Paul beginning in Acts 13. Nevertheless, the Jewish Christians could be put into 2 groups, Greek-speaking Jews, Hellenistic, and the Aramaic-speaking Jews, the local population. At the time of the founding of the early church was largely Aramaic-speaking, as Jesus was himself. All of his original teachings would have been in Aramaic, not in Greek. But at Pentecost, Luke tells us in Acts 2, verses 5 and 6, that there were devout Jews in Jerusalem at that time who came as pilgrims for the festival of Pentecost from every nation under heaven, which was Luke's way of saying from all around the known world. So many of these Jews, while perhaps being familiar with biblical Hebrew as good Jews, would have read and spoken in Greek rather than in Aramaic. In their home countries, they may very well have been people of some means, hence the ability to travel and take a pilgrimage. They were still likely relatively resourceless here in Jerusalem, and their widows especially so. So they would have relied on the daily distribution of food. But the people who set up the daily food distribution posted the information about the Widows Support Program, or Widows Link, on the Aramaic-speaking websites, or their first century equivalents. So the Greek-speaking widows had no access to the information or were slow to determine how to benefit from the program. All this happened without assuming the active animosity was fueling leaving out the Greek-speaking widows. We didn't try to exclude you, the apostles might have said. Yes, we see that, but you didn't make an effort to include us, would have been the kind but clear reply. So in response, the apostles, like Moses, don't respond defensively where they might have, but delegate to a new group the vision and task of taking care of the widows, both the local and Greek-speaking populations. And at least it seems, the deacons they appoint all have Greek names. They all sound like they might have come from the group of people complaining about the problem. Now, they could have done it differently. They could have said, okay, we'll appoint 3 Greek speakers, 3 Aramaic speakers, and we'll have 1 apostle on the team to break the ties when voting. Or they might have said, well, we have roughly 3-to-1 ratio of Aramaic to Greek widows, so perhaps we'll have 6 Aramaic speakers, 2 Greek speakers, and an apostle to lead the team. They might have considered representative democracy or some nominal delegation where the authority remains held by the speaker or the incumbent Aramaic-speaking group. But they don't choose either of these strategies. They seem to go out of their way to empower the ethnic minority group that had been disempowered in the prior setup. As those who have been injured unintentionally, they would have been most sensitive to justice and fairness concerns. And as they are given the task with the vision to be fair and have consideration for all, they would understandably bend over backward to ensure justice was done rather than merely to reverse the injustice. It was a very good solution, and we don't hear about this issue anymore in the story of the book of Acts. I've been part of many churches that could be fairly called multi-ethnic. Though usually one culture was the host culture while the other ethnicities were welcome, but not entirely at home. This is how it is in most churches in most parts of the world. It is challenging to build a multi-ethnic church that feels equally uncomfortable to every culture, which is what it would, by necessity, need to feel like. This is a good reminder that if we want to claim to be multi-ethnic, we need the true empowerment of the members of our churches and organizations who are ethnic minorities, including giving them, as the apostles did here in Acts 6, real vision and decision-making authority and responsibility. Nothing short of this will really work. Finally, I want to talk about the notion of subsidiarity. It's good to introduce this concept, and it may be familiar to you, but it might also not be. The principle of subsidiarity is defined as a community of a higher order should not interfere in the internal life of a community of a lower order, depriving the latter of its functions, but rather should support it in case of need and help to coordinate its activity and the activities of the rest of society, always with a view to the common good. When I read about subsidiarity, I see this word introduced as essential to Catholic social and ethical teaching. Still, I think it goes all the way back to this passage in Exodus. It is not just prudent to delegate to a system of judges over 10, 100, and 1,000, but it is ethical. It is not just efficient to have different levels of leadership to handle different levels of responsibility. It is a moral value. Let people who are closest to a situation handle a situation unless they cannot, in which case it needs to be handled by a more responsible parties at a higher level. On a practical level, it means that the Pope does not decide what color the carpet in the aisle of a particular parish church should be. That is a decision left to the local parish. The Pope may be required to speak about the ordination of women or not. Many decisions are made at the local level, as they should be. An organization that scales successfully, as it must be acknowledged that the Catholic Church has done so, however imperfectly, like every other institution, will need to give deference to this principle of subsidiarity. So whether it is property disputes, this is my cow. No, this is my cow. Or debts to be paid, you owe me money. I said I would pay next week. Or more severe disputes, he slept with my wife. Well, she didn't act married. It would be better to have simple matters handled by lower level judges. In contrast, tricky issues, or with complicated trade offs of values, would be better handled by those with more age, experience, and wisdom. It never made sense to do it Moses' way, but Moses hadn't the wealth of people leading experience that Jethro, as a priest of Midian, would have had. So even though God chose Moses to lead the people, Jethro wasn't questioning that. God chose Jethro to give Moses the wisdom he needed to honor people and lead them well by not arrogating to himself decisions and determinations that could be made by people closer to the issues than he was. It was both ethical and humane, preventing him and the people from being worn out. It is not surprising that Jethro has this word from Moses before he could go up to the mountain for 40 days to be with God and receive the 10 Commandments. Delegation made that possible, as the judicial process could continue in Moses' absence. Likewise, Luke tells us in Acts 6:7 that the result of this change was that the ministry grew in effectiveness and many priests began coming into the faith. What a sign of the blessing and power of God in this new leadership structure, one that many churches have continued to use down to this day. Briefly, I just want to talk about a few case examples of bad delegators. The counselor type leader who likes to listen to and solve everyone's problems. It is a success when someone in your small group receives valuable care from someone else in your small group, when it doesn't take time with you, the leader, for them to feel listened to. The do-it-all who knows that everyone else is unreliable. When half the people coming to your small group are contributing to its success in some way, leading worship or prayer or bringing snacks or hosting in their home, then it is less likely to feel like your small group and more likely to feel like our small group. And finally, the in over my eyeballs leader that doesn't have time to delegate. Sometimes when we even would wish to delegate, it takes more planning rather than just do everything ourselves. But we miss a developmental opportunity for others in our group or ministry. Finally, a few questions for reflection. Ask yourself, what do I get out of not delegating? What lies am I believing? What fruit am I not seeing? In what areas could I delegate better? And secondly, how does my church or my ministry or my organization or my company handle subsidiarity and delegation of tasks with responsibility and ownership of the vision? Consider a recent case study or a common tension regarding delegation and assess it in light of this study. Thank you for watching this video, and if you did, I appreciate if you would like and the video and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me to get the word out. If there's someone you know that might benefit from watching this video, please send them the link.